Welcome to How Do They Afford That, the podcast that peeks into the financial lives of everyday Australians. I'm Michael Thompson. I'm a writer and the co-host of the podcast Fear and Greed Business News. As always, I'm with Canna Campbell, financial planner and founder of Sugar Mama TV, the financial literacy platform that you'll find on podcasts like this one and books and Instagram, YouTube, TikTok and more. Canna, can you kick off today's episode with an absolute ripper of a savings hack for us?
I most definitely can, and I'd like to say a big thank you to Bridget, who sent this to me. She said, "Hi, Canna, you may have been contacted regarding this hack. However, I cannot believe how good this little hack is. Has anyone told you about the 7-Eleven fuel lock? Basically, you can lock in a fuel price for 1 week. The hack being on Tuesday, the fuel price is generally lower. I save between $10 to $12 per tank." She's even screenshotted her receipt to show me the exact savings, which is $10.56 this week. Seems insignificant, but when you think about how much money you spend at Woolworths to earn $10.
That's a great hack.
It's a brilliant hack.
Oh, can I lodge a protest?
Yes.
So you're
No.
Yes, you already said I can. You are using the hacks provided by listeners.
Our listeners are lovely, loyal listeners.
Why did the listeners who are providing you hacks, why don't they send them to me instead? Because I'm the one that needs the help coming up with these great tips and ideas.
But clearly you're not applying the help, so they'd be wasted on you.
Okay, a plea. Head to Michael Thompson Author on Instagram and send me your hacks instead and allow me to become the savings wizard rather than Canna. Because, I mean, I've tried to come up with my own in the past and you just slap them down. But with the support of our listeners, I reckon I can come up with some crackers. Oh. You've just given up already. We barely even started.
Fine, take them.
Thank you. We barely even started the episode. That is a great tip, though. Look, today, everyone loves talking about property. It's obviously, it's no surprise, really, because I think it's something about 66% of Australian households own their own home, either outright or with a mortgage. There's a couple of interesting trends, actually, Canna, when it comes to property in Australia. The number of people with a mortgage is rising, which probably makes sense because property prices are rising. Younger people are taking out larger loans for longer, so they're in that kind of part of the market for a longer period of time. And at the same time, you've got the number of people renting is also increasing as well, which is probably for much the same reason, that the cost of getting into the market is increasing. So it does lead us to today's topic, which is all about the hidden costs of property. Now, this can apply to a whole bunch of people. You might be living in your own home with a mortgage or not. You could be a property investor. You could be thinking about entering the property market and getting on the ladder with a purchase. So it makes sense to be aware of what some of those hidden costs of property actually are. Before we do that, we need to make it very clear that everything we talk about is general in nature. It's never personal investment, or strategic or product advice. It is purely for financial education purposes only.
Absolutely. We don't know anything about your situation, what your goals and dreams are, and what the deadlines for those goals and dreams are. So please always bear that in mind.
I'm putting us on a bit of a time diet, a time limit. Diet's definitely the wrong analogy here, but we have a lot of information we want to get through today, and we're going to do it in record time. We're just going to
Power through.
Yeah, good point. Let's start with buying a property. Right. So people, I mean, I'm probably guilty of this, where you go to one of the property apps and you're kind of scrolling through and you're looking at kind of what the listed price is for a property, and you kind of look at the purchase price and you make the mistake potentially of thinking that's it. But there's a lot of expenses involved with buying a house or buying an apartment. Let's start with stamp duty.
Right. So stamp duty is a once-off state tax that's levied on the buyer at the time of settlement, and the amount that you have to pay subject to location and the price of the property.
What's the point? What is the point of stamp duty? Because I have seen it described as being one of the most inefficient taxes, partly because it basically puts the brakes on people moving around. And it's one of those things, basically a disincentive almost to people downsizing into a smaller property that might be more suitable for them, and freeing up larger properties for people that need more space, but they're kind of discouraged from doing it because they're going to be hit by stamp duty.
Well, it's predominantly for government revenue funding public services. So infrastructure, healthcare, education, all those sorts of things. So it is needed to help fund the facilities that we use every single day.
Some states are thinking differently about it, though, aren't they? There's been kind of talk over the last couple of years about some alternative models to stamp duty, including one that kind of included almost the option to either pay stamp duty or to pay essentially a land tax.
Yes, on an annual basis.
Okay. And look, I'm sure that over in coming years we'll see kind of different options being put forward, because there is a general kind of dislike, I think, of stamp duty, isn't it? Clearly my personal bias here is coming through just a wee bit.
Look, I don't have an opinion really around it. I think it's extremely frustrating, and I agree that it's outdated and, potentially it is part of the problem with our housing crisis, because it stops people from moving around and, people tend to stay and not move, which doesn't then free up property. So it could be part of one of many solutions needed for our property crisis.
Yeah. So, but you need to be adding it on. Like you need to
know about it and factor it into your numbers, particularly if you're going to have to look at putting some of that cost of stamp duty onto your borrow capacity. And
there's a stamp duty calculator and things that you can use when you go to any of the like the property websites, whether it is kind of realestate.com or Domain or any of them.
Exactly.
And you can calculate what the stamp duty would likely be, and then you can figure out whether you can even afford this property to begin with.
And it does vary from state to state, so make sure you select the right state so you get the right calculation.
Very good point. We mentioned in passing their land tax. Who has to pay that? Is it just investors?
Pretty much, and people who own multiple properties. So it doesn't include your principal place of residence, but there is a threshold to it. So once you trigger that threshold, you have to start paying land tax.
Even if it is your principal place of residence? So that's always excluded? Always excluded.
Okay. But if you have like a beach house and you have multiple investment properties, particularly if they're houses and there's a land value element to it, and when you hit that threshold, and that threshold does vary from state to state, you then, when you hit that threshold, you trigger, and it's a sliding scale, so there's no sort of flat calculator. But a good accountant will make sure you're properly registered so you're aware of land tax.
And land tax is calculated, as the name suggests, on the value of the land, not on the value of the property that's on it. And the values are set by, is it like the Valuer General or something like that? I don't know where this is coming from right now, just this information.
Well, if you look at your council rates, you can see the supposable value of that land.
Yeah, okay. All right. And now taxes. What other taxes then are associated with property? Land tax is obviously a big one if it is a second property, and you don't necessarily have to have it as an investment. It just is as an additional property to the one that you're living in.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
The other taxes.
So there's obviously capital gains tax if you go to sell, and it's assuming it's not a principal place of residence.
Again, that's excluded, isn't it? If it's your principal place of residence and you make a profit.
It's assuming you haven't rented that property out.
Okay. Yep.
Prior.
Yep. No, that's good. You're looking at me as I'm like, oh, God, Michael, have you done this? No, I'm clear. I'm like,
oh.
No, sorry, please go on. I've interrupted you too many times.
Obviously, there's stamp duty we've just mentioned. There's transfer fees for the title. There might be also mortgage registration fees, legal and conveyance fees, mortgage application fees, mortgage insurance, LMI, inspection fees, and building and insurance. And then, of course, your moving fees. So whilst, yes, there's some taxes, there's also a lot of fees. And these fees can really quickly add up.
Mortgage insurance. Can we very briefly talk about that one? Because that really comes down to if you borrow above a certain threshold, isn't it?
If you don't have the full deposit that the bank requires, and banks will actually vary as to where mortgage insurance is required. So some might be 15%, some might be 10%, some above 15%. It really does vary. So a mortgage broker will help you navigate the best place to go depending on the size of your deposit, but they will require a lump sum amount of money that's factored into the mortgage to help add an element of protection, unfortunately for the bank, because obviously you're deemed as being high risk because you're taking on a larger mortgage with a smaller deposit. It can be expensive though.
I'm listening to this, and that list is because we have bought property in the past, and you do kind of forget just how many fees and things there are as you actually go through that. Can you just read out that list again?
Of course. So I said CGT, stamp duty, transfer fees for the title, mortgage registration fee, legal fee, conveyance fee, mortgage application fee, lender's mortgage insurance, inspection fees, building insurance. Actually, building inspection's another one that sometimes has to be done, particularly if you need to get a pest inspection done or if there's any potential structural issues. And then obviously the removalists.
And all of this can add thousands and thousands of dollars, especially when you factor in stamp duty as the biggest kind of portion of all of that typically. But the rest of it, it's not an insignificant sum, so it needs to be kind of factored into whether or not you can afford the property that you're looking at.
Before you put an offer in or go to an auction.
Yeah, that's a good point. Look, I want to talk to you about insurances and kind of council rates and a whole bunch of other things. We might take a very quick break and then come back and get into those ones. Canna, we're talking about the hidden costs of property, and it's really about kind of being aware of these things because really, in most cases, there's no avoiding these costs, but it's more just about knowing that they're coming and being able to either budget for them or make sure that you're able to afford it before you take the plunge and make an offer on a property. We talked about the costs associated with buying a home and stamp duty and land tax and CGT and a bunch of those other ones. What about insurances? Because it's really important when it comes to property to make sure that you are actually covered. We're talking kind of home and contents. Kind of how expensive can this get?
Look, it depends on where your home is, the size of it, the value of it, what you want covered. So many elements to this and moving pieces. But for example, whether you have a burglar alarm, do you have a swimming pool? What is the house 1 level or 2 levels? Is it an apartment? Does it have a lift? What security system does it have? There's so many different factors that come in. And then, of course, what's your excess? You can change your excess sometimes, which can increase and decrease your premiums. But most banks will ask for a copy of the certificate of insurance when it comes to settling your loan.
That feels very overwhelming. And maybe I'm speaking from personal experience. I get overwhelmed a little bit by insurance. And trying to compare. And I know there's a lot of websites out there where you can actually just go to there and you can compare kind of what your excess is going to be, what the premiums are going to be, and what's covered and all of this kind of thing. But it's really not until you get into the fine print that you really kind of see what is excluded and what isn't, and kind of where, the one might seem to be much cheaper than the others, but it's actually because you're not covered for a big chunk of something, whatever it was. Is there any assistance out there? Is there any way to kind of get guidance on this whole process in terms of insurance?
I think using those comparison websites is a brilliant place to start.
Yeah.
But then my next step would be to get on the phone and actually ask questions. So I never hesitate from picking up the phone and drilling someone with a dozen questions. And I have actually done this in the past with my own home and contents insurance to understand, okay, if this happened, would I be covered? Okay, how much would I be covered for? What's the limit? What can I do to, bring my premiums down? And, I've spent 20 minutes on the phone talking to a consultant, asking for their general advice and guidance around making sure that I do have the right type of cover for my home and for my needs and my budget.
But I suppose cheapest is not always best.
Correct. And also looking at, obviously the reputation of the insurance company, but looking at maybe awards that they've won, their history of the organisation, whether they've ever had a class action, all those sorts of things are really important. Their payout rates, those are the sorts of things you want to be looking for, because at the end of the day, the time that insurance policy really matters is when you have to go and claim. So you want to make sure it's a smooth process. There are no loopholes, and you know what you're paying for, and it's comprehensive, correct cover.
There are some things that can really affect the cost of insurance, though, isn't there? Say, for instance, if you live in a flood-prone area or a bushfire, where suddenly the cost just is significant.
But did you know that with some insurance companies, and these are probably with the newer insurance companies, you can install certain devices, like kind of Google Home devices around the home to help keep your premiums low so that they will signal an alarm to your phone, for example, if a fridge or freezer is leaking.
Really?
Yeah. I can't remember off the top of my head. I think it may be True Insurance, I think is the company. I have had a complete mental blank. And they will actually have a satellite navigation system. So, for example, they can actually see your house and keep it monitored, and they can say, well, oh, look, you've now had a pool installed. You actually haven't got that covered in your insurance policy. You need to update that. Things like having a security alarm put in that can also help bring down the insurance premiums, having double locked doors and windows. Like, there are lots of different things that you can actually do to help protect your house, but then also reap the financial benefits of more competitive premiums.
Okay, on to council rates. How are they calculated? And there's no way to save on that, is there? It's just a case of budgeting appropriately.
Yes, so yes, there's no way to negotiate a better deal with your council.
You can't ring up the phone to the mayor and say, look, Mr. Mayor, I'd like to pay 50%. How do you take that? I think
he'd have a bit of a chuckle. He or she would have a bit of a chuckle. But it really does vary on the individual, like the value of your property. And also how much they need to actually fund the infrastructure, like the sewage system, the water system within the area as well. So,
getting your bins picked up.
Yeah, exactly. So you don't really have any control. You're at their mercy.
Yeah, I suppose it's good actually to think about what you're actually getting for that and realising that, hey, it's great to have your recycling picked up every week and your bins picked up every week and stuff. There are actually kind of benefits to
help keep the area look nice and tidy, which actually, instead of focusing about and being annoyed at your council rates, think about, it's actually helping keep the area nice and clean and tidy, which is going to hopefully increase the value of your property. It's actually important flow-on effect.
Yep, and your library as well.
Exactly.
Yeah, it all kind of goes
the parks for your children.
Oh, yeah. God, it feels like now this has turned into an ad for councils. And this is why pay your rates on time, people, because it keeps books in the library and keeps your slides polished. Do you polish a slide?
I think kids polish it with their bums as they slide down.
You know what they don't have anymore? Metal slides. Do you remember when you were a kid and the slides were metal?
And they're hot.
I know.
Like metal.
Oh, really?
They don't get hot.
Ours are all plastic. Like, everything is all that kind of plasticky stuff. You know what we should campaign to bring back? Like the double height kind of slides, the really kind of tall ladders that you had to climb up. And then you get to the top and there'd be kind of other kids climbing up behind you. So you had to go down, even if you were to sit on there and you just instant kind of blisters on your legs from the heat of the slide. That is an experience that kids these days are missing out on. It actually doesn't sound very good. I don't think I've sold it very well. But are you with me, Ken?
I'm just going to nod my head politely and pretend, yes, I'm with you.
Great. Well, this is why you should pay your council rates so that we get our slides back in our playgrounds. Maintenance on your property.
Oh, this is a big one.
This would be variable, very variable, depending on everything, how big your house is, kind of how much maintenance it actually needs, whether you've got things like a pool or whether you've got exactly.
How old it is, whether you're in an apartment or a townhouse.
Yep.
Or a freestanding house, how many levels, even things like the roof, what materials they've used.
Here we go.
The quality of the workmanship.
Do you budget for that? Do you budget for maintenance, or are you using, say, your emergency fund for this? Because you don't reasonably expect your roof to start leaking or something. So it feels a little bit kind of overcautious to say, I'm going to set aside $100 a month or something to put into kind of a repairs fund or a roof repairs fund just in case my roof starts leaking one day. Is that something that you'd use your emergency money for?
So for a big once-off, yes, that's going to come out of emergency money.
Yep.
However, in the Sugar Mama Budget and Cash Flow Academy, we actually have a section within the budget that we recommend everyone have for maintenance, because a lot of damage can be reduced by maintenance, even just like paying someone to get onto your roof and clean out your gutters of all the leaves that collect over time, because that can then cause pressure in the pipes, then cause internal water damage, which is something I experienced at a huge, huge financial cost that was not covered by insurance. So definitely, and even I have in our family budget and again in the Sugar Mama Budget and Cash Flow Academy course, I have a line there for the hardware store like Bunnings, because you do need to take care of your home and maintaining it. And have you ever gone to Bunnings and bought one thing?
Do you know what I always buy at Bunnings?
Yeah.
Like my one thing that I will always come out of Bunnings with, WD-40. I don't know why, but it's just, WD-40.
Very handy.
Yeah, the squeak thing.
Yeah.
It is my go-to thing. If you walk into Bunnings and you're not sure what to get, and I have zero handyman skills, so the one thing I'm qualified to use is a can of WD-40, and it is my go-to thing whenever I get there. So if you ever have anything that needs de-squeaking, this guy.
But maintenance is so important. Like, I've literally last week, our dryer broke.
Oh.
So that's maintenance. I've got to go, and I spent $200 getting someone to come out to repair it, to then tell me, no, you need a brand new dryer. This one is completely gone. So you need to be real as to the cost of owning property, because if you were renting, you would be calling your landlord saying, this just broke. You're going to have to buy a new one. Here's the bill. That's
a very good segue into, for investors, the property management costs. And there's kind of two parts to this probably. There's those maintenance costs and kind of fixing those things that do go wrong, because suddenly you are responsible for all those little things that do go wrong, and fixing whether it's if a window's broken or if there's an appliance that's part of the property that's busted, that's on you to fix that. But then there's also the property management costs as well, isn't there, in terms of if it's a real estate agent or property manager as part of that they are doing the inspections and they are collecting the rent, and there is a portion of the rent that goes towards paying them.
Exactly. So a property manager, particularly if someone's very time poor and has a property portfolio or was building a property portfolio, yes, it can be a very efficient use of funds, but it's not cheap. They take between 5 to 10% of the rent, which is, does eat into your bottom line, with the average around 6%. They also take a leasing fee, which can be 1 to 2 weeks rent. So every time your tenant moves out, not only have you got to pay marketing fees and also potentially a couple of weeks where you're in between tenants, they'll also, when they've found you that new tenant, take that 1 to 2 weeks worth of rent. So if you've got a property with a high turnover of tenants, that's very, very expensive. You're getting hit left, right and centre with multiple fees on a regular basis. And then they can also, depending on how they sort of package up their services, they may charge you inspection fees, tribunal preparation fees, annual statement fees, lease renewal fees, administration, which are all sort of under the umbrella of miscellaneous fees.
Though it's also hard to... We've talked in the past about rent vesting and the idea of kind of living where you want, and renting there, and perhaps buying an investment property in another location where you can afford it. And that might mean that if you want to live in, say, Melbourne, and you can afford to buy a property in a regional area, really, a property manager might be the only way that you're going to be able to kind of run that property, keep tabs on it, and make sure that the tenants are actually looked after as well, because that's an important part of this. You've got to have the tenants' interests in mind as well, and they're going to need somebody to contact when things go wrong. And for some people, it's probably actually beneficial to have a go-between.
And also the other benefit of a property manager is it takes out that awkwardness. If there's an issue where someone's maybe behind or, the tenant wants something done, they can just go to a property manager and say, look, this carpet's really old and disgusting. Can we please look to replace it, rather than having to go to the landlord direct and potentially have an awkward conversation of saying, look, do you mind getting some new carpet? This is kind of disgusting. So It does sometimes, people tend to prefer dealing with a property manager who also understands the rules and what's acceptable and what's not, and, can kind of find a win-win for everyone.
Okay, one last question, because once again, we're running out of time, but we've covered so much stuff here, so I don't think we should kind of be too hard on ourselves for running a little bit over. Depreciation reports, kind of when you are when you're an investor, how does all of that work?
All right, so this is a funny one, and I was so shocked to read this. So apparently up to 70% of property investors don't have a depreciation schedule done. So basically what depreciation is, it's a non-cash deduction that allows you to claim a portion of the wear and tear on a property off your tax And it can be very, very valuable, particularly if you have a new or new-ish property. So you can claim this depreciation schedule over a period of time. Now, the cost of getting that depreciation schedule ranges between sort of $440 to about $770. But what it does is essentially fattens up your tax refund potentially, because you've been able to claim the wear and tear of that property that hasn't physically cost you anything off your tax.
And it runs, and you can use that same schedule for X number of years.
Correct.
And so it's kind of a one-off cost in relation to that.
And even the cost of that depreciation schedule is tax deductible.
Oh, well, I think it's
70% of Australians aren't getting this done.
I'm amazed.
Crazy?
I'm amazed by that, because really it is just that kind of one-off step.
And if you're listening to this going, I didn't even know about this, I've got an investment property and I've never claimed this. Well, don't fret. Go get it done now, and you might be able to get your accountant to hopefully amend your previous tax returns so that you can go back retrospectively fix it.
Wow, we've covered some ground. There's a lot. So, I mean, we talked about kind of the not just assuming that the purchase price of a property, whether it's a home or a house or an apartment, is the end of it. That there's a lot of expenses involved in buying a property, starting with stamp duty, which is the big hit. And you can jump online and do calculations to see what the stamp duty is going to cost, because you need to make sure that you are going to actually be able to cover that cost, and whether you actually need to add that on to the loan that you might be seeking for that property. And all of the other, there's a lot of legal fees and a lot of mortgage application fees and related kind of costs that it pays to be aware of what you are getting yourself in for those ones. Then if you're an investor, or if you have a second property, being aware of land tax and all of the other kind of various other taxes, and capital gains tax if you were to sell a property that is not your primary residence and perhaps make a profit on that you would be looking at a capital gains tax event in that particular case. So it's important, really important, to get professional advice when you're kind of dealing in a lot of these things from your accountant, but also your financial planner in terms of what your long-term strategy is in relation to that. Then this is how much stuff we covered today.
Very efficient, productive.
I feel like we jammed more into this episode today than in any other single episode, because I haven't even finished the summary yet. I'm only halfway through, because then there was insurances, which are a big expense, home and contents, and so many variables there, and it can really depend on kind of where you live and whether it's bushfire prone or flood prone or those kinds of things. But there are ways to bring that cost down by making sure that you've got kind of locks on your doors, and you've got kind of all the various kind of things that you can do that both make your home more secure, but also help to bring the cost of insurance down. And your insurers can advise you on those things and the impact that it's going to have on the premiums that you're going to be paying. Council rates, nothing you can do about those. You just have to pay them, but look at the benefits. And we discussed this in terms of the libraries and having your bins picked up and having the slides polished in the local playground. Maintenance, a very big expense. And really, it is something that you're going to need to do in order to maintain the property that you are living in and budget for it accordingly. And if you're an investor, property management costs, they can range from kind of the cost of actually advertising your property in order to get a new tenant in, or even to have maintenance and repairs done. But look into a depreciation schedule, because it may save you a fair bit of money in the long term. The summary took nearly as long as the episode. I'm actually out of breath. Now, if we want more information, where do we go?
The fastest way to get in contact with me is on Instagram at Sugar Mama TV, or of course you can listen to my Monday morning podcast on Sugar Mama's Fireplay.
And you can hear me every day with Sean Aylmer on Fear and Greed, Australia's best business podcast. Thank you very much for listening to How Do They Afford That? Remember to hit follow on the podcast. Please leave us a 5-star rating and leave us a review as well. Next week, we're talking all about the cost of living crisis and what we can do to ease the pressure a little bit. Don't miss it.